Okay, on this lecture, we'll talk about some terminologies on to determine the morphological characteristics in plants. So, morphological terminology has been in use for description of species for several centuries and continues to be the principal source of taxonomic evidence. So, the descriptive terminology is very exhaustive, and as such, only the most commonly used terms are illustrated here. Therefore, I try my best to explain the most commonly used terms for this class. So basically, my aim is to make sure you guys can have some picture of understanding on how to describe and identify the plants. So honestly, it takes years of training and experience to really master the skill or this kind of skill. Okay, this take years. So but I just give you some basic principle ideas for this course or for this lecture. So basically, any botanical analysis of a plant necessitates the availability of information about its characteristics. The descriptive information about the morphology of a plant, which is called a phytography, is suitable to express in semi-technical language through a set of terms which provide an ambiguous representation of the plant. The descriptive terminology thus precedes any taxonomic or phylogenetic analysis of a taxon. So the reasons we use morphological characteristics of the plants are because the morphology of organisms can be compared, can be counted, can be measured, can be described, and also can be evaluated. The similarity and difference between taxa are based on their morphological characteristics, and morphological characters are determined based on the observation and analysis on samples. So quantitative characteristics, for instance, can be measured also and also can be counted. So good characters to determine the description or morphologic or taxonomical evidence for certain species, certain individual, or certain organisms are not affected and influenced by any environmental changes. So which means that they must be constant, they must be uh, reliable. Okay, and then vegetative characteristics are easy and easy influenced by the environment. Yeah. So before we go further, just to set here that there are two primary functions of plant systematics. So first, for naming and characterize the plants, or generally known as taxonomy, and second is to look at the evolutionary history of the plants, known as the phylogeny. So when we understand the systems, we can put the plants into groups. The systematic methods is actually the essence, or if I may say, the father of the biology itself. Okay, so let's look at what some of the goals of plant systematics. One of the most important goals, and one we are going to spend a lot of time on, is the goal of nomenclature. We want to provide a name for every group of plants. So this is a very legalistic, if I can say, where they are very formal rules, and they are laid down in a document which is the international code for the nomenclature for algae and plants. So these are very legalistic and very formal. So, and the code itself is revised every 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. So nomenclature is an extremely important function of systematic for naming the plants. Second big group of goal is what we call as classification. So that is the arrangement of plants into groups, and those groups should have a common characteristics. I'm sure you know this from other classes. So we go down from the division down to the species level. We had a division, class, order, family. Usually that end with AC, in genus and a species. Uh, uh, and even and then sometimes we can have a below the species level as well. As we'll see in the next slide, the division is called the phylum in zoology. So in botany, it's called division. It's called phylum. It's the same level in the hierarchy, and then we go down to the species. So these are groups within groups. Within each species, within each genus, there are multiple species. Within each genus, there are multiple families. Within each family, there are multiple genera, etc., etc. Okay. Finally, at the species level, there are two names, and this is called binomial nomenclature, where we have the genus and the species. I'm pretty sure you guys are already familiar with this term. Okay. In addition to classification, we have description. There's two part of description. We want to assign features to the taxas that we are describing. There is basically direct description of them when those descriptions are used in various ways. And also we want to inventory the world's flora to be able to make a list of the plants that occur in various regions of the world. These inventories are usually done regionally, like a flora of Peninsular Malaysia, flora of Borneo, etc. We have a lot of books on that. Kind of like encyclopedia of that. So next is also the identification. So within this flora, there is some a means or ways of identifying a plant. So identifying an unknown plant, let's say you've got a plant sitting there in your hand and you want to know what it is. Uh, so you can use the tools, and those tools are the taxonomic keys. So I'm not going to give a detailed uh, explanation on that. So a taxonomic keys is the mechanisms, if I can say, of identifying the unknown plants, not the only one, but it's one of them. So this the taxonomy keys. A classical taxonomy really depends on these keys, and it is essential for plant identification. I wish I have more time to discuss about this topic. So identifications also depend on what we call as herbarium. You already discussed this in the previous class, I believe. The herbaria are the collection of dried identified plants. These are reference collections. So essentially, a herbarium is a plant museum, but it's a funny plant museum because it consists of a dead plant, a dried plants, the dead plants which have been flattened. I think you already we have discussed this in previous class. So and our last goal, of course, in for plant systematics is to get the phylogeny, that is determining the evolutionary relationship of the plants. So we already seen some phylogenies when we look at those phytogenetic trees to determine the taxas. Nowadays we use mainly DNA evidence, but of course in some cases we still use morphology. So morphological characteristics, morphology is the form of the plant. It's usually the most typical way of constructing phylogenies, the most typical way in the past, and again in the last, I think I can say around 30 years, since the 30 years ago, DNA evidence has really come to the fore, and that is the predominant right now, the predominant way right now. I encourage all of you to explore molecular and genetics fields because this is the way of current or modern biology right now. So, as I mentioned before, it takes years of training and experience to be comfortable in identifying and classifying the plants in a detailed way. Okay, despite the importance, this field, because all people in the taxonomies, is not an economical field. Only the true enthusiasts will venture in this field. If you go for money, this is not your field, but we still have handful of people, so if I can call it experts, to identify and classify the plants. So you've got to find one when you have certain issues in plant identification, but then you got to convince them that you are not going to annoy them very much. So come prepared, then therefore you need to concentrate in this class. So why we study plant systematics? Well, it really is a foundational subject in biology. If you cannot identify plants, if you cannot recognize plants, it's very hard for you to It's not, you cannot call yourself a botanist, okay? If you're going for study on animal, you cannot call yourself a zoologist. So this is part of the biology of naming things. This idea of naming things is really important. This is the foundation of biology, if I can say. If you don't know what something's name is, we can't really do any work on it. Okay, so I mean, let's just suppose that you have people doing genetic work on a medicinal herb, for instance, that they found from orang asli in the jungle, and we got one lab doing the work and on it, and they say, we got an herbs here, and we are doing lots of work on it for medicinal things, for all the good stuff, and we've done all this molecular work, and we found all these genes and do these other things, and somebody else goes down and they collect another herb of plant and in another lab, let's say, and they start doing molecular work, and they say, oh well, we can't verify any of those plants, verify on those things, and it's because they got different species of herb or plant, and without some way of knowing that they're really dealing with exactly the same thing, probably with exactly the same species, sometimes with the some subspecies. So then all the molecular work that we see being done would have no basis. So that's how we know we got this the same species, is because of the systematics, because we have people out there naming things and making sure that the names are applied correctly. This is really an integrative science. This is necessary for all the other sciences. So we also work with economically important plants. Many times there are importance in conservation, for instance. So again, if you are dealing with a smuggler that bringing a plant across our country or state borders illegally, and this happen much too often right now, I believe. So I'm afraid so. So, and you catch them. How does you, as an officer, like a marquis, the quarantine officer at the border, so to know that this person is bringing one of the protected plants, the endangered species, of course the smuggler is saying, oh no 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 no, this is not the species, this is a different species, this is not protected whatsoever, okay, whatnot. You have the basic of plant identification, the principle of plant systematics. You will be easily be fooled if you don't have that. And of course, you are not qualified to be that officer at the border if you don't have the basic plant identification. So my approach to plant systematic it's really going to show us how science is really done. So it's not done by a few really smart scientists going out there and finding out the truth about the world by a few experiments. It's really done by scientists going out there and doing work on the natural environment, and then arguing over what that work means, and then eventually coming to some kind of conclusion and presenting that data for other people. So in the history of plant systematics, biologists have been arguing over what the best way to name organisms. We all think are great, and then it's important reason for studying plant systematic. But there is one other reason that plants really are a lot of fun, if I can say. So all of these things are great, and they are important reason for studying plant systematics. But there is one other reason, if I can say, and that is plants really a lot of fun, and they are really cool. And I hope by the end of my series of lecture you agree with me on that. I hope after completing all the lectures later, you will have a different perspective when looking at the plants. So enjoy.